Hello everybody, this is a quick common service data model overview and briefing that I typically give customers when they are first introduced to the CSDM and also CMDB here on the ServiceNow platform. So today we're going to cover the strategic context for data on the platform, the three pillars of successful data foundation, which I like to think about this problem in three different ways. And we've seen the most success when you focus on these three areas. Balance your focus so you don't do one versus the other, but you have to do a little bit of all three. And finally, features supporting CSDM that you should know about and leverage as you implement ServiceNow. So the first thing I would like to cover is that the CMDB is sort of central to most of the products that we sell on the platform. I came here to manage a product called APM, App Portfolio Management, over here on the right. And there are many other products here that coexist. We have about 1,000 product managers now, and there's a lot more products in this. But these are the main ones, and these are the main areas of the products that we invest in various ways. Now, the cool thing about being on the platform as a product manager who has worked in other companies before and try to make all these products work together is that we can share data across all of these products. So some products contribute, some products use the data, and some will do a bit of both. For example, my APM product that I used to manage manages the app portfolio and capabilities as an example, and that's stored in the repository. And those business applications can be seen in service management incident forms as an example. So these are all things that can happen. The other reason I joined ServiceNow is because I would like to join information across all these different spaces because they're much more robust as a result. So for example, when evaluating your app portfolio, you need to understand how it's used, the risks in the portfolio, the assets used within the applications. You need to understand the what's on the cloud or not. Yeah. And so all of these elements kind of go into the evaluation criteria of business applications. And there's more like costs and things like that we won't get into today. But the cool thing about being on the platform is all of these products contribute to that picture in making a sound rationalization decision. Likewise, when you're dealing with a security vulnerability, understanding the application context or understanding what assets you have that are covered by that vulnerability. So the central CMDB and Service Graph is a name we give the broader model here at ServiceNow as the model extends into areas that aren't traditionally CMDBs. CMDBs traditionally cover the operational concerns of physical infrastructure, but as we move to cloud and as our model extends into pre-operational or more conceptual elements like business capabilities, the model we call Service Graph kind of covers that larger gambit. Now, to get started with the three pillars, we have to think about the data in the platform in three different columns. And you have to do all three in order to make this work, regardless of what product that you use that uses the information or that contributes information. So the first pillar is what I call ingestion. And the ingestion is all about bringing data in continuously from various sources and merging it into a single trusted repository. We want to connect the discoverable to the non-discoverable information in this process as well. And last but not least is you want to ensure that that data is managed by somebody that owns it. Invariably, the folks that are managing the data repository doesn't necessarily own any of the data in it. It's sourced from other folks, other products on the platform, and other sources. Service Graph connectors, discovery, service mapping, all of those products are basically the ones that contribute that data. And some products, such as SPM, products APM, be able to capture information from humans as we inventory the services, as we inventory the applications. Those are all things that we need to ingest. The next pillar is what I call govern. And this is the idea of anything you bring in, you should have a life cycle and plan to get rid of it. So if you don't have a plan to get rid of it, it'll likely never go away. So you need to consider the life cycle of any new information you bring in, including human or automated discovery sources. You need to be able to support the use and extensions, so there has to be some kind of governance team and roles established. And without governance, people will just add information ad hoc. Even though the data is already there somewhere else, they may add additional fields or tables that are not necessary. These are all things you should govern. You also need to be able to communicate and manage those structures and definitions. Now, we provide this for you in terms of what CSDM is all about. CSDM is there to communicate from our perspective, what's the common service data model, what's the common model that is used throughout all the different products. And that model will continue to grow and evolve as the commonalities continue to grow across our platform. And the last column is insight. The data that we gather is to provide value, usually for analysis, be able to understand like operational impacts of a change or an incident, as an example, to use for planning. So when you're planning a data center move or moving from on-prem to cloud, for example, all this information is useful. So we want to be able to basically, first and foremost, support the personas and products that we sell on the platform. And my guidance is don't collect information if you don't have a use for it. People bring in everything because they can, and then invariably that turns into a bit of a liability, especially if you don't have a lifecycle process to get rid of it. It kind of sticks around and never goes away, and you need to deal with that. Now, here are some of the features in the CMDB. We basically provide a lot of functionality in these three pillars, and we're really aligning the way we come to market with around these three pillars, so we can communicate, okay, these are the product features for ingestion versus governance versus, insight. The first pillar is about having an ingestion pipeline and using something called Integration Hub ETL. This is a product feature that allows you to bring information in safely and reconcile it with the existing information. We also have something, and that's called IRE, or Identification Reconciliation Engine. Well, the next thing down here is something called multi-source CMDB, and that's a feature to be able to store some of the raw data coming in from various sources so you can debug and troubleshoot things. What we typically find is information coming in from various sources may have erroneous data or outdated data, or it's just not updated properly. So you might use Discovery, for example, ITOM visibility, and also SCCM. SCCM may not have the latest details. Discover might have pertinent details. But of course, those details also need to be merged into a single record at the end of the day. And by looking at those details, you may decide on using one source that's more trustworthy over another. On governance, we have Data CMDB Manager is used for marking information as retired or archived or deleted, deleting that information. And we also have Data Manager looking at things like certification and attestation processes. So it's a nice tool. A lot of customers before this came along were doing this on their own. Now there's a central place to establish those policies. CMDB Class Manager to actually establish the class structures, so what kind of data that we have in the CMDB. CMDB 360 is a visualization of the multi-source data. So you can see that data coming in, compare and contrast it using some out-of-the-box reporting capabilities. We have, of course, documents and guides. There's some features like dynamic CI groups that allow you to manage inventories of CIs as a query, basically, and be able to use that in various processes. We have dashboards that help you manage the health. CMDB health dashboards have been in there for a long time. You establish the criteria for the health in there, and you establish the use of that health dashboards as you need. Data Foundations dashboard, however, is our view on data health, and you can't change those. We provide HSDs that allow you to establish criteria from our perspective, kind of like grading your own paper versus having us provide our perspective on the data health that you have. We also provide a prioritization of these metrics. So we also have playbooks to fix the data that needs to be fixed within each of these metrics. So we have the Insight pillar, which has features like the CMDB workspace that allows you to access the information and view the diagrams, things like that, to see the class structures. Query Builder to be able to build queries that traverse many objects, many different paths through the data. So for example, business capability to business application to app service down into underlying CIs. Service Graph Data Visualizer lets you look at how that Service Graph connectors are bringing data in. CSDM product views allows you to see how the products use the data that's in the system. So this is a good reference to say, oh, I'm bringing in this data. Does anything really need it? You can kind of use this as a reference. The CMDB search allows you to do natural language queries of the system. You don't have to know the query builder query structures. It'll produce those for you. And last but not least is the support products that we actually sell. Again, don't bring in data that you don't really need. The products that you use it for, whether it be an audit process or ITOM health, event management, or just regular ITSM processes like incident, problem, and change. I like to think about the value of the data across many different areas, and the criticality of this data is increasing all the time. As the data comes in from various sources, it gets leveraged more and more across the board, and it's important that we're talking about the same data. So when somebody talks about an application or software, we're all referring to the same thing. We're not basically referring to different things or in different tables within the platform. And there's a lot of features that require the CSDM structure. CSDM was introduced a number of years ago now to basically guide our product teams in order to better produce products that are natively integrated, that we're kind of sharing and reusing our data. And since it was introduced, we've been moving our products to leveraging this common data in a common way. And so some of the new products and features that we have are really start off with CMDB Data Manager itself. This leverages the lifecycle stage and status fields that we introduced some years ago. You can use the synchronization between legacy and the new ones, or there's an option to switch it over to using legacy fields, but that is something what I would call stepping backwards. Using the new ones allows you to move forward as new products are coming out on using those new stages and statuses. Dynamic CI Group is a new feature that came in Paris. It accommodates many different use cases. Even in customer service management, we're finding a huge adoption curve there. Business applications, you can now see those on the incident form. The incident is not supposed to go against the application because that's ambiguous. It doesn't speak to the actual CIs and the operational information that you have in the data center. Business applications is a higher level concept. And you want to just see those business apps as the CI is identified. You can see the net number of business apps as well as the net number of services that are impacted. CSDM is used in change management. There's videos on this. There's also documentation on how, but we unpack that dynamic CI group. There may be 1,000 CIs being updated in a patch, and we're able to track each one individually through change management by unpacking those. Application Service Wizard allows you to create those app services in the CSDM structure. We're not going to get into that today in detail, but this allows you to create them dynamically as part of your CI/CD process and synchronize the CMDB with the activities going on. Last here is the data synchronization process that looks at the ownership information at the technical service level. This is a very high-level abstraction. For example, you may have a network team that owns networking devices across 5 different facilities. By creating a query used in that dynamic CI group, you can associate that team, the ownership, the change management, and the incident management information groups, basically to be specific, to all the CIs that they happen to own. So if any incident happens against the CI, let's say somebody finds a damaged Wi-Fi device in the corner of the building, we can automatically identify the folks that need to work on that particular item. Some new products that use CSDM. SiteRel SRO is ability to expose to the DevOps teams the ability to create their app services in the user experience. A lot of folks will create microservices or change the microservices over time. So allowing DevOps to teams to kind of define those microservices as they collapse them or create new ones on their own and be part of the process versus have to rely on other people to define these things, especially if you're not using APIs up here. Service Builder is a nice feature to be able to create services, the offerings and connections to the app services and the catalog items per CSDM. We'll look at that in a minute, but the idea here is that we want to allow service owners to kind of control their own destiny and learn about how they store and manage that data about the service within the platform. So huge opportunity to not only train those service managers, but to get the right model in place without having to learn CSDM and all the details. Digital portfolio management allows both the service management activities and application development and planning activities to be all seen in one spot under what we call enterprise portfolios. So that's a very powerful feature to bring the dev and ops worlds together on the platform, especially as we're moving more towards product teams that own the full life cycle of their deliverables. The next is DevOps config, and this is an area that's kind of leveraging the SDLC component in the build domain. This is the only product that currently uses CSDM SDLC component. More is planned, but as of today, that's kind of the only one. Last but not least, is important to point out these product views in our doc site, and those are just reference materials. As you use different products, you can actually leverage the product views to see what data is used or contributed to the model as a whole. So I like to explain to folks what CSDM is in the context of that full, what I call digital products and services lifecycle. The idea here is that you'll plan something. It's a product or a service or an app. Obviously, if you do provide an application, it is consumed as a service and managed as CIs in the operations team. And so when you see this name Service Graph, it really pertains to that whole model from end to end. And of course, in that model, you have pre-operational information about what's being deployed or planned, what's being purchased from an asset management point of view. And then also you're looking at more conceptual elements like business capabilities and business apps, information objects, which are higher level concepts. CSDM is our guidance, and internally we treat this more like governance. We mandate our product managers to leverage CSDM. Obviously, not everything is going to be caught. Sometimes some of our product teams will come out with a feature that doesn't leverage something common. We would typically have that caught by customers that are using CSDM and then addressed over time. As CSDM expands and covers more and more products, we will also incorporate some governance and internal training to get those internal teams kind of on board with this common model. This is a nice, easy way to kind of look at, traditionally it's been CMDB has been infrastructure, but now we're getting more information in the model. And so as CSDM kind of grows, you'll see some elements that aren't traditionally just operational and infrastructure pieces, but we want to understand the conceptual context as well. So when you look at Common Service Data Model, these are the 4 key domains of CSDM. So we have the design domain here, kind of in the beginning. This is where your more conceptual elements of the model, like business capabilities and business apps, are created and are used for planning activities. The next domain is build, and this is the newest area for CSDM. It's still being fleshed out in terms of how many products actually interact in this area. DevOps and Agile are the key ones, and the other areas, such as DevOps config, is specific to the SDLC component in that area. The next area is manage. This is your typical operations and asset management space when we're managing the technology as it appears in the data center or in the cloud data centers. Then last but not least is consume. And this is where we're managing the use of technologies through IT service management and customer service management. So some of the things that customers will use from a company are running in those data centers, and we need to understand how that connects all the way back to planning. And so you can see we're addressing the full life cycle of what's going on in the CSDM model, from initial planning and ideation processes all the way through operations and use. Now, all of this model sits on what we call the foundations domain. The foundations domain in CSDM deals with common information that is used across all these areas. Things like location hierarchies, business unit hierarchies, product models, things that you buy or you might think about building or buying in the planning stages. So, and software, hardware, things like that, product models. So we'll look at these in a minute. But this gives you an idea of the 4 key domains and then the 5th foundational domain that CSDM consists of. As we look at the CSDM model, you see the 4 key domains and their color codes here on the main diagram. At the bottom here, you'll see the foundational domain. Sorry that got cut off a little bit by the video, but I just wanted to make sure that you understand the 4 key areas that we're talking about. And the fact that on the design domain, this is where we engage typically folks like enterprise architects, app owners, to define the business apps and things like capability hierarchies that are used for planning purposes. Then in the build domain, we have SDLC component. This is currently optional, and there is a connection that is still maintained and used heavily that bypasses this. So think of that as the express highway. And if you do have SDLC components, this is just giving you more detail with regards to the breakdown of that business application and the config files and things that basically make up the applications. A lot more functionality is planned there, and so hold on over the next couple of years as we flesh this build area domain out much further. Down here on the lower left, we have the Managed Technical Services domain. Here we're managing the technology at the physical level. I like to think about these as your traditional CIs, physically representing the physical data center elements or client compute or network devices, things like that. We also include cloud CIs in this equation. So we bring in cloud data through discovery as well as through Service Graph connectors. The application service, I like to think about as your logical playground. This is where we describe the deployments of each applications. That's one common use, or the starting point of the application stack from top down. And these stack can be structured in that logical area in a couple different common ways. For example, a platform architecture may have one platform that supports many products on top of it. And so each product on top of it relies on the platform and the way the platform is installed and managed, and it could be in the data center or in the cloud, doesn't really matter. The opposite is true for microservices. So microservices may be one application service that's logically connected to many microservices. Those microservices are also application services in our model, and they're used to be able to describe each underlying app service and the fact that they're all part of a whole. And just think these are not mutually exclusive patterns. They can be mixed and matched as necessary, but this is our logical tier that describes how we are broken down those things, again, for the technical service management aspect of things. These can be monitored independently, and we can see the dependencies between them left and right. So some of these might provide APIs. Those APIs might be consumed by other applications, as an example. Down on the right-hand side, we have sell and consume, and these are the elements that describe the offering in the business service and then how it's also consumed by a business consumer. The business consumer, I like to think about this as your last mile of consumption. Over on the left-hand side, you'll notice that we have these infrastructure pieces that are managed in aggregate. So like I described earlier, the network team might own the different network gears in different facilities, or break that down into different offerings, different SLAs, OLAs, or different teams that manage each of the buildings. So as you break down the infrastructure, that's going to allow you to create offerings that relate to the infrastructure that's being managed to an SLA or to a group. When it comes to the technical service here, we're dealing with applications that are more or less building blocks or platforms which are meant to be used to build applications on top of, like the ServiceNow platform as an example. And then of course over here we're dealing with technology consumers, and we also want to promote self-service using things through the catalog. On the right hand side, the structure is the same. The biggest difference between the business consumer and the technology consumer is the fact that the business consumers, we know who they are. We have their names. So on the business consumers, we know who they are. We have their names. We understand where they are. And there are subscribers in the business service offering that you can relate to the everybody in a location, for example, a group of people, and those groups would of course contain users themselves individually, or an entire department as an example. So, and if users are related to those departments, we'll know exactly all those individuals that might be impacted if a service goes down. We have precision in terms of understanding the business context. Down at the bottom here, we see the foundational elements, things like business processes, contracts from suppliers, either service suppliers or vendors that provide software and hardware to you, product models. Now, product models are kind of interesting. Product models are used heavily in asset management, but also in the CMDB to relate the physical infrastructure and software that are used or assets from cloud vendors. And then also you can use product models to indicate things like different versions of the request catalog or business offering or SDLC components. So product models can be used in a lot of contexts. Location hierarchy, same thing. You can have the location of a specific network device or server, but also locations of where the consumers are. So you can use this more maybe a geographic area versus specific building or a GPS location of a server, given where it was deployed. Groups and users, obviously, those are coming from user groups and that sort of thing. Versus CMDB groups. CMDB groups are more or less used as part of dynamic CI groups to group hardware or CIs in general. And then there's organizational breakdown structure, company, business units, and departments used in various ways. And the last but not least are life cycles. So when is the ideation all the way through use, through end of life, and there's quite a few life cycles there. And life cycles in our model cover kind of the gambit. These are, like I said, there's a new set of life cycles we're migrating folks to. But there's also a lot of legacy stuff that's out there. Some products have migrated, some have not. So this is used, and the new ones are used specifically more for read-only at this point. And over the next couple years, potentially, we'll have most of our products refactored to using these new life cycles. So something to keep in mind as you adopt CSDM and you get into this detail. A lot of folks think CSDM is theory and it's not really relevant, but it does tie you to the physical models in the platform. And here's just a list you can look at for reference purposes. Some things to point out in this infrastructure CIs, we have over 1,000 CI types that are down at this level. So something to keep in mind is that as the different types of devices grow, so will the infrastructure CIs grow. And we're getting into use cases such as operational technologies, things like actuators, PLC devices, things that are in the factory, not necessarily in traditional IT. So all that counts as infrastructure CIs. We also have some ambiguity here in the application services. There's different types depending on how you manage the details of each type. So this is something to keep in mind as you're looking at the model. You do want to understand the way you want to manage that, tags versus discovery or service mapping. You'll have to look at the type to know what table to use. I recommend that you use the wizard that I explained earlier to see what tables are structured and what the prerequisite data values should be for those types, like tags for tags-based app service mapping. The next is on the relationships. These are going to be the relationship types in solid lines, and in the dotted lines are the references. These are the reference attributes that we have, and some are parents, some are just references. So you want to look at the actual table structures that we implement on how we connect the dots between these particular elements. A lot of folks will also refer to the CSDM, if you're an architect, as a meta model. It's the model of our data model. So that's another way to think about it. The thing to think about when you're adopting CSDM, a lot of our customers have been on the platform for a long time. You want to be able to look at this data model and progress to it and incrementally. And a lot of folks, depending on the level of customization, how long you've been on the platform, what products you may or may not use, this has a lot of bearing. The first is really the focus on the foundation data. If you're a new customer, get this right out of the box, right? Get your data coming from users into the system. And by the way, when you're bringing information from non-CI tables, you can now leverage the CMDB tools, IRE, multi-source, things like that, in order to look at the data as it comes in from various sources about users. An example would be Active Directory to understand their groups, but you may want to augment that data with the departments from Workday or PeopleSoft. So that's a common thing. So take care of your foundation data first. Locations is also a very key element that you'd want to be able to tackle early on to make sure that location hierarchies are complete, down to as lowest level detail as you can. Rack and elevation. If you have an element manager, if you have a DCIM system, data center infrastructure management system, you may have rack elevation level details. Crawl deals with what I consider the conceptual to logical to physical data model. The reason we start with crawl is twofold. The first reason is because a lot of times you're dealing with architects at the crawl level, at the business application level. You're dealing with architects at the business application level, and you get them involved with the data, the infrastructure folks, the operations folks down here at discoverable piece parts. This is where operations tends to really start, but they need to connect. So the oftentimes you can find a business application portfolio, you can find discovery, and then the question is, how do we connect these two? These might be in different systems initially, but as you adopt ServiceNow, you can leverage everything on ServiceNow to manage both ends and keep those two connected. Just in connecting the business apps to discovery, for example, in all the parts in the data center, you can often find opportunities to optimize what you have. For example, you may have a lot of infrastructure that has been retired and nobody turned off the infrastructure in the data center. So getting a tight line between these two worlds is usually important. Next is walk, being able to leverage the technical services and be able to leverage the dynamic CI group to be able to query what CIs are related to what technical services. So what teams manage those services, what are the life cycles, what are the support, what are the SLAs for those particular items. Getting the technical services folks on board is important. This is IT helping IT folks and the engineering disciplines to understand what they own and manage in the data center and to do that better over time as they adopt various processes. Next is run, where we introduce the offering and business service, and this often relies on some of that core data as well, like who are the users. And if you know the location for that particular business service, you can identify the related users through the location relationship. So as it's a better management of the services and its context, the better off you'll be long term. Last is fly. And fly is really, I like to think about that, is the icing on the cake for the rest of the model. You can actually bring some of these elements early. I also often get the question about, well, wait a minute, Mark, we're bringing in our business applications right here. We have a mature capability hierarchy. You can certainly bring those in earlier and establish them right after as you define crawl. So these are guidelines. This is all guidance at the end of the day. So don't look at this like CSDM bingo. You don't have to do things in this order, and you don't have to do everything we're saying to do in CSDM. We just recognize the products that we have, the use cases that they provide, usually use this data in a very succinct way. And this is just a guide to get you there and to leverage and get the value out of the data on the platform. So I wanted to thank you for paying attention to this session. This is just a very high-level overview of the three pillars, CSDM, what the CMDB is all about, some of the tools available, some of the products available to help you get up to speed and use CSDM and our CMDB in a more successful way. And so if you need more information, these links will be provided at the bottom of the video and allows you to kind of jump in there. Some of the things, for example, are impact offerings. We have services now that we provide in order to assess your CSDM situation and provide advice, or to assess your CMDB at a basic level to see what quality issues you might have that need to be addressed. We have a huge following on YouTube. This video is one of many. We'll have a link to the playlist here at the very end. And there's a lot of on-demand material available in Now Create. Now Create is part of our Now training area and allows you to download additional information, additional presentations about CSDM that you can leverage right away. Example models are a very common thing, and there's some workshop materials if you want to run an internal workshop or do your own thing to be able to kind of workshop, getting your data model into the CSDM format. And last but not least is product documentation. We have really good product documentation out there. We try to keep all this information about about references of what kind of products are using what kind of data, how to migrate to the new life cycles. There's documentation on that. So this is all good reference material. And last, I don't want to miss this, but the community site and the CSDM paper itself, which is the original how we delivered this to customers in the very, very beginning, is a white paper. So you can look at the CSDM white paper. It may say draft on the white paper, but it's been out there for 2 years now, and it hasn't changed, and that is pretty much what's been used ever since. So count the draft as a final version. Thank you very much for paying attention to this session, and I hope it's useful.